ፈኖ ሬድዮ ድምፂ ኤርትራ DC እዩ ሬድዮ ድምፂ ኤርትራ DC ቀዳም በመንገዲ መርበብ ሓበሬታ ኣብ voiceoferitra.com ወይ ውን በመንገዲ YouTube ተቐማጡ ዋሽንግተን ዲሲን ከባቢያን ከምኡውን ንመላእ ዓለም ይፍኖ ተኸታተልትን ሰማዕትን ሬድዮና ከመይ ቀኒኹም ካብ ድምፅኹም ዝኾነት ሬድዮ ድምፂ ኤርትራ DC እናበልኩ ናይ ሎሚ ቀዳም ጥሪ 8 2022 ወይ ድማ 8th of January 2022 መደብ ፈነወ ዜናና ከም ዝስዕብ ኣዳሊና ኣለና ምክትታልኩም ድማ ብትሕትና ንዕድም ቀዳማይ ዜና ካብ ከተማ ኣስመራ ብወኪልና ጋዜጠኛ ገረመስቀል ገረዝጊሄር ካልኣይ ቃለ ምሕትት ምስተር ራኽን ተንታንን ጋዜጠኛ ቶማስ ማውንቴን ካልእን ደጠቓለለ ክኸውን እዩ ኣብ መንጎ መደባትና ምልክታን ሓበሬታን ንኣኻትኩም ኣዘናግዒ ዝብልናዮ ሙዚቃን ኣዳሊና ኣለና ኣብዚ ናይ ሎማዓንቲ ፕሮግራምና ምሳና ሓቢርኩም ክትፀንሑ እንዳተላበኹ ሰናይ ምክትታል ክኾነልኩም ብስም ቦድ ድምፂ ኤርትራ DC ይምነየልኩም ሰናይ ምክትታል
ينافقك عاد ينافقك عاد
ካብዚ ካብ ዋሽንግተን DC ሬድዮ ድምፂ ኤርትራ ዝመሓላለፍ ዘሎ መደባትኩም ተከታተሉ ዘለኹም ክቡራት ሰማዕትና በመቀጠል ዜና ካብ ከተማ ኣስመራ ነው
ካብዛ ጽምዓትን ሃገር ጽምዓትን ዝኾነት ኤርትራ ዕዙዝ ሰላምታ ይብጻሕኩም ዝኸበርኩም ተኸታተልቲ ድምፂ ኤርትራ ከመይ ኣለኹም ብቆጻጽራ ግእዝ ትማል ዓርቢ ኣብ መላእ ኤርትራ በዓል ልደት ተኸቢሩ ውዒሉ ንኹልኹም ኣብ መላእ ዓለም እትርከቡ ኤርትራውያን ብፍላይ ድማ ንኹልኹም ኣመንቲ ክርስትና ዝሑስ በዓል ልደትን ሓድሽ ዓመትን ክኾነልኩም ካብዛ ምችውቲ ከተማን ቅድሚ ምክልኻል ለበዳ ኮሮና ቫይረስ ብጽኑዕ ተተግቢሩላ ዘሎ ከተማ ኣስመራን ሰናይት ሚተይ ዝገልጽ ገረመስቀል ገረዝጊሄር ዜና ነው ኤርትራን ቻይናን በመሰረት ውሳኔ ፕሬዝዳንት ኢሳያስ አፈወርቂን ፕሬዝዳንት ቻይና ሺ ጂንፒንግን ስትራቴጂያዊ ምሕዝነትን ንምብልታል ክሰርሓ ምዃነን ተሰሚዐን ፕሬዝዳንት ኢሳያስ አፈወርቂ ኣብ ዝሓለፈ ረብዕቲ ኣብ ኤርትራ ናይ ክልተ መዓልታት ምብፃሕ ስራሕ ዝፈጸመ ሚኒስተር ጉዳያት ወፃኢ ቻይና ሚስተር ዋንጊው ሰፊሕ ዘተ ብምክያድ ድማ ኣብ ምርድዳእ በፂሖም ስትራቴጂያዊ ባህሪ ዝምድና ቻይና ምስ ኤርትራ ብምርድዳእካ ፕሬዝዳንት ሺ ጂንፒንግ ምስ ፕሬዝዳንት ኢሳያስ ኣብ ዝቐልጠፈ ግዜ ተራኺቡ ክዝቲ ድሌት ከም ዘለዎ ብመንገዲ ሚስተር ዋንጊው ኣቢሉ ናብ ፕሬዝዳንት ኢሳያስ አፈወርቂ ኣብ ዘመሓላልፎ መልእኽቲ ኣፍሊጡ ቻይና ኣብ ዝሓለፈ 100 ዓመታት ዘምጻት ለውጢ ንህዝቢ ቻይና ጥራይ ዘይኮነ ንመላእ ዓለምን ህዝብታት ኩለን ሃገራትን ዓቢ ኣበርክቶ ከም ዘለዎ ዝገልጸ ፕሬዝዳንት ኢሳያስ ቻይና ምስ ኣፍሪካ እትገብሮ ዘላ ዓቢ ሚዛን ዝወሃቦ ምትሕጋዝ መቢሶ ፕሬዝዳንት ኢሳያስ ብዘይካዚ ኣጠማምታ መደባትን ቀዳምነታትን መንግስቲ ኤርትራ ኣብ ክልታዊ ሽርክነትን ኣብ ዞባውን ኣህጉራዊ ምዕባለታትን ዝተሰረተ ምዃኑ ንሚኒስተር ዋንጊው ብዝርዝር ሓቢሩ ኤርትራን ቻይናን ኣብ ክልታዊ ልምዓታዊ መደባት ብቐንዱ ድማ ኣብ ምዕባል ዓቕሚ ሰብ ኣብ ትሕቲ ቅልፂ ኣብ ምዕባል ወደባት ባፅዕን ዓሰብን ከምኡውን ኣብ ዕድና ኣተኲረን ክሰርሓ ተሰናኒዐን ኣለዋ ሚኒስተር ጉዳያት ወፃኢ ቻይና ሚስተር ዋንጊ ቦገኖ ሪቶን መርገጽታትን ኤርትራን ቻይናን ተመሳሳሊ ምዃኑ በመግላጽ ኤርትራ ስለቲ ጽኑዕ ደገፋ ንቻይና ኣመስጊኖ ዘይካዚ ቻይና ኣብ ልዕሊ ኤርትራ ንዝፍጸም ዘይሕጋዊ በይናዊ እገረታት ከም ትነጽግን ኤርትራ ብኩሉ ሸነኽ ነፍሳን ምክልኻልን ናይ ልምዓት መደባታ ብምሉእ ናጽነትን ምውሳንን ንዘለዋ መሰል ከም ትድግፍ ሚኒስተር ጉዳያት ወፃኢ ቻይና ብተወሳኺ ገሊጾም ኣብ ትርክብ ፕሬዝዳንት ኢሳያስ ምስ ሚኒስተር ጉዳያት ወፃኢ ዋንጊው ዝተኻየደ ብወገን ቻይና ምክትል ሚኒስተር ንግዲ ሓዳጋዚ ሚኒስተር ጉዳያት ወፃኢ ዋና ዳይሬክተር ኮርፖሬሽን ኣህጉራዊ ምትሕግጋዝ ከምኡውን ኣብ ሚኒስተር ጉዳያት ወፃኢ ቻይና ምክትል ዋና ዳይሬክተር ጉዳያት ኣፍሪካ ብወገን ኤርትራ ድማ ሚኒስተር ጉዳያት ወፃኢ ዑስማን ሳልሕ أما خارج بريزيدنت أطيمان جبراب على في كتبة وقدات حزبه وجنبار للمقاسم فتحن أتو حابس قبل وتصات فميرام بس وقدس أبنة كيرلس حمشاي باتريارك رئيس اللي كانت أطاسات هاجر إيرترا بأقاطامي كبر بعل الدات مدحنينا إيس كريستوس نملا حزب إيرترا أبوشتن وطن ونقعنا بذكبر على تابقعكم بمبال يهون أم بمجلاس قالوا براكي هبا بس أبنة كيرلس عم ملغتان أبحلوا هاجر نزركبو جاقانو حيلتات مكل خال إيرترا أبستفل عليه دادنا نساتوا فيهم الزلو جاقانو لمعات حزبهم نمدحان ليتم عالتن كي يتحللون السرح الزلون عبيت عوتات نزمزقو الزلو صميات عنا كمون بسنة قدرت عنا أبحكمنا تعاويهم نزركبو حمومان أبتهب بسنة نزركبو زيغاتات رحوس بعلدت كونو لبمناي مجلسي بعلدت كابزلك مكفالن متحلاين متحدادن بمخانو الزورزي بهل الزبيئتا كالسالنتك الودما نزقنايو كان عنقل نزعارقو دما كنكدم نزدخمو كندقفي قباء كبلو دليسا بصو أبنو كيرلس بزي كازي يرأم الزلو دقسل لبدا كورونا فيروس نمكل خال كل زيغا من قسل الزوصو ممحيك اتعنك الخال كتقبر تلابيو من تنحسينو من اللو أب إيرترا من صحفح لبدا كورونا فيروس من حدش قلوباو كستسن أزيو قراري وقتن بصلا يدما أبزور حاتزي سندلو محبراون هايمانساون أقات عمتات اتلا بدا كي صحفح أزيو سكستا كنزلن إزيك تنكا كنزقبان منسرة عنا بتغذي أتنكيوون أب إيرترا لبدا كوفيد 19 مجزاء أبز حلفا كرت عمتات كفيلاوي مرقات زرطغالل تريرن سرسيحنا يمكن خالص قمتي توسيدو كان سنحز حبر حيل عمام من فرد عنا نس كله قطباون محبراون سبقنا في دماء بغصبتين نسنا وحق زين سالا استوز دسو قمتي زرقحنا يتبارس بخلو على ما يخون زباو معكانتات أبدحان برجا كان زركب قليسو يخون بريلو حال عمام من فرد عنا يخون بر وتم تأويجان سنحو كلهم ما يمكن خالق قطعتات كخبرو كان صلوهم داقماي آتنكيهم لبدا كوفيد 19 بسنك كل طفناي من لبعان متفتحن بحر الظلوه حدش جير أميكرونن قرارو وقت سننا ونفك أكبر بدرجة علن بأزيو ذا سنبد نهري يعرض كان ظلن ظلت يوم أبعلن بسنك درجير ظلو جيرات كورونا فيروس أتم كابوتاي نبعدهم كاتو دليجاشو بستخع لمكان مدشهم نزل كلت ثلاثة أوارح انت الزوان زفو زحاشي كبل ريتو قلت الله مزحنت كله هدراوي محبر منسيات انتو نهارون إيرترا كاب زعمت الجميرو أب كله زكايلو سرحات انتلاي نتوم أبو سادر كاب منسيات زترنفن زحيلن زودبن تخون كان ظلوه حلفي بوليتيكا وقدات زباو جنبار اللي مبعتهم فتحن أطي معنا جبراب آدم زيبو أطي معنا جبراب نزجن زبي هدراوي محبر منسيات انتو نهارون إيرترا حديش استراتيجيكا وحن سراتات أحنسيسو جبراوس قومتات الموساد أبزخ إلو بايتا أبزكي إلو أخيرايو هدراوي محبر منسيات تمهر الإرتام الزأتين يزلنا مدرسة لسانة لمغتا من إسيات كل عودة الزحية القمون من إسيات فلتتهم كئلتهم مهزنتهم أظن عبرلو مسارتها وبدايات عمل كتب مزتاي وسانتات أحلف الله أبستفر لي هاجرات سنبرو إيرتراويان نسون كلامن صبنات دكانستيون كمون نفدراسو أتزوعل كلتا ميتين ثلاثين شمون تنشيحنا وفاز قمة حاجز بجنزبن عينة تغيرو بمسابة حضريتها هاجراو محضر حرمن تسون كلام كينات إيرترا أبخل عندك كتما هيلفرسن زنبرو قدسات زيغاتات أتو أماني الفصوى مريامن مع الكبيتو وزر الجنة هاتسينن مسكالت دكانستيون بمتحضر وقاميتن 50 شحنا أفا فرنون لواسيتن أما عسكر دمدن زنبرات اللي تسون كلام دكانستيو أدر كتام زي كازي ونانتن كانوا تفيد حاسين فرنون أتماتي واستصفاي وقا 35 شحنا أفا مسرحي باست فرنون مسأل خيدنا وتن أدر كتوم ذكام زيلن كله أبهاجر كندا زنبرا أبلات حماده نعسفت السقمات دكانستيو نبرت زبا مأكل من نفسه كفن 3 شحنا أفا دنزبا حدث أدر كتان بخارو قندماج أنفرس حسنكات من قستي أبنو الزبا فورو كابور حاو دمز أبلات استواتي فرنسا لستشحن 4 نقفة من 3 سبرا سوقات من نفسه كفن 7 تشحن 8 نقفة تغفافيلو ضربكم تغفافيل كدن سيرتا أرنا إذا حلف الصومن زينا يكن زبلت قوة وأن 9 عمس عدنيان ويزرد قوينا نقص سبهاتو 3 شحن نقفة بيتمر تحالي 4 شحن نقفة محضركم همادئن دار مشتاتن جيسنن كبابيان جيرمان للي 4 شحيرو بحفشة معكن حبر سنعتات من جسام 55 شحن أفان 4 شحن شعمن كنتين 9 يورو جنزباوي وفيا مقبارم محباري زفلاتيو ኣብ ኤርትራ ዝመደበሮም ኣምባሳደራት ፈጸምቲ ጉዳያት ኤምባሲታትን ቆንስላትን ካልኦት ዲፕሎማሲያትን ሓለፍቲ ትካላት ውድብ ሕብረት ሃገራትን ብምክንያት መስዋዕቲ ሓርበኛ ረመዳን መሐመድ ኑር ኣብ ኣስመራ ኣዳራሽ ደምደም ኣብ ዝተከፍተ መግለጺ ሓዘን ደብተር ናብ ህዝብን መንግስትን ኤርትራ ናይ ጽንዓት ይሃብኩም መልእኽቲ ከመሓላልፉ ቀኒዮም እቶም ዲፕሎማሲያታት ኣብ መልእኽቶም ኣብዚ ረዚን ናይ ሓዘን እዋን ምስ ህዝብን መንግስትን ኤርትራ ዘለዎም ከውነታዊ ምሕዝነት ዝገልጽ መልእኽትታት ኣስፊሮም ስነ ስርዓት ቀብሪ ገዲም ተቃላሰ ሓርበኛ ረመዳን መሐመድ ኑር ብሰንበት ክልተ ጥሪ ፕሬዝዳንት ኢሳያስ አፈወርቂ ላዕለዎት ሰበ ስልጣን መንግስትን ግንባርን ኣዘዝቲ ሰራዊት መራሕቲ ሃይማኖት ቤተሰቡን መቃልስቱን ኣብ ዝተረኽብሉ ኣብ መካነ መቃብር ሓርበኛታት ብልዑል ማዕርግ ምፍጻሙ ዝዝከር እዩ ኣብ ንዞባ በሪኽ ነበርቲ ምምሕዳር ከባቢ ቆሸት ዕናጉዶ ብምክንያት ሓድሽ ዓመት 2022 ፀዳዱ ኣብ ዝተባሃለ ቦታ ልምዓታዊ ወፈራታት የካይድ ኣለዉ እዚ ፀዳዱ ዝበሃል ቦታ መግዛእታዊ ስርዓት ደርግ ኣብ እዋን ሓርነታዊ ቃልሲ ዝተማርኹ ተጋደልትን ናይ ውሽጢ ስርዓትን ዝርሸንሉ ዝነበሩ ቦታ ምንባር ዝፍለጥ እዩ ኣብቲ ከባቢ ፋሒሉ ዝተቐብረ ኣስከሬን ሰማዕታት ብምእካብ ብግቡእ ኣብ መቃብር ሓርበኛታት ከም ዝዓርሱ ንምባርን ቀፅሪ ናይቲ መቃብር ሓርበኛታት ምንዳቕን ኣካል ናይቲ ዝካየድ ዘሎ ወፈራዊ ስራሕ ምዃኑ ተገሊጹ ኣሎ ኣስከሬን ሰማዕታት ፀዳዱ ንምእካብን ወፂኡ ዘሎ መደብ ንምስማርን ህዝቢ ዕናጉዶ ዝኣክል ምትሕብባር ክገብር ብምሕዳር ንሶባ በሪኽ ተላቢዩ ኣሎ 147 ኣባላት ዝሓቆፈ ማሕበር ኣፍረይቲ ኣሕምልትን ፍረታትን ንዞባ ኣቁርደት ዘፍርዮ ኩሉ ዓይነት ምህርቲ ብቐጥታ ኣብ ኢድ ሸማታይ ሕብረተሰብ ዝበፅሓሉ ባይታ ንምፍጣር መዲቡ ኣለኹ ክብል ኣብዚ ሓድሽ ዓመት ኣብ ዝሃበ ሓበሬታ ኣፍሊጡ ኣሎ ማሕበር ኣፍረይቲ ኣሕምልትን ፍረታትን ንዞባ ኣቁርደት ዛጌት በቲ ማሕበር ኣቢሉ ፍርያቱ ናብ ዕዳጋታት ይቐርብ እኳ እንተሎ በቲ ኩነታት ዝያዳ ተጠቀምቲ ግን ነጋዶን ደላሎን ምዃኖም ገሊጹ እቲ ማሕበር ኣብዚ እዋን እዚ ኣተኪሩ ካብ ዝሰርሓሎም ዘሎ መደባት ሓደ ዘፍርዮ ፍርያት ኣሕምልትን ፍረታትን ብቐጥታ ናብ ተጠቃሚ ህዝቢ ምብፃሕ ምዃኑ ገሊጹ ኣሎ ካልእ ካብ ዓበይቲ መደባት እቲ ማሕበር ብሰንኪ ባህርያዊ ሓደጋታት ዝተሃስዩ ኣባላቱ ምሕጋዝን ናይ ሽቕለት ዕድላት ምፍጣርን ምዃኑ ብተወሳኺ ኣፍሊጡ ኣባላት እዚ ምዕራባዊ ግንባር ኣብ ንዞባ ሻምብቆ ምዝተፈላለየ ኩባንያታት ህንፃ ማለት ምስ ኩባንያ ህንፃ ብድሆን ፕሮጀክት ኩባንያ ህንፃ ዓድሃሎን ብምትሕብባር ዘካይድዎ ዘሎ ዓበይቲ ዳግም ህንፃዊ ስርሓት ብዝለዓለ ናህሪ ክቅፅልዎ ምዃኖም ኣብዚ ሰሙን እዚ ኣረጋጊፆም ኣባላት እዚ ምዕራባዊ ግንባር ነዘረጋገፁ ወከልቲ ህዝቢ ዝተፈላለየ ምምሕዳራት ከባቢ ንዞባ ሻምብቆን ሃገራዊ ማሕበር ደቂ ኣንስትዮ ኤርትራን ኣብቲ ቦታ ልምዓት ብምኻድ ብዝገበረሎም ናይ ምትብባዕ ዕንጉዶት ኣብ ዘስምዕዎ ቃል እዩ ኣዛዚ ምዕራባዊ ግንባር ብሪጋደር ጀነራል ስሞን ዕቁበ ኣብቲ ስነ ስርዓት ተረኺቡ ብህዝቢ ንዞባ ሻምብቆ ዝተገበረሎም ናይ ምትብባዕ ዕንጉዶት ብምንኣድ ዝተጀመረ ዳግም ህንፃዊ ስርሓት ክሳብ ዝዛዘም ማህሮም ከም ዘየዝሕሉ ኣረጋጊፆም ኣለዎም ወከልቲ ህዝቢ ብወገኖም ብኣባላት እዚ ምዕራባዊ ግንባር ዝካየድ ዘሎ ዳግም ህንፃዊ ስርሓት ዕጉባት ምዃኖም ገሊፆም ሰራዊት ኤርትራ ሰራዊት ልምዓት እዩ ብዝብል ድማ ኣብ ጎኖም ከም ዝስለፉ ኣረጋጊፆም ኣለዉ እቲ ምድላዋት ጉጅለ ባህሊ ክፍለ ሰራዊት 57 ደሚቁ ምውዓሉ ካብ ከባቢ ሻምብቆ ዝበፅሓ ሓበሬታ ኣፍሊጡ እዚ ከምዚ ኢሉ እንከሎ ኣባላት ኮንፌደሬሽን ሰራሕተኛታት ኤርትራ ኣብ ዝሓለፈ ሰሙን ምስቶም ኣብ ዲጋ ጋሕቴላይ ዝነጥፉ ዘለዉ ጀጋኑ ልምዓት ብሓባር ክዘናግዑ ውዒሎም እዮም ኣብ ዞባ ካሽባርካ ዝርግሐን ተጠቃምነትን ዓሳ ኣብ ህዝቢ ንምስፋሕ ክካየድ ዝፀንሐ ፃዕሪ ዘተባብዑ ውፅኢት ከም ዝተረኽቦ ኣብዚ ሰሙን እዚ ኣብ ዝተካየደ ገምጋም ስራሕ ተገሊጹ ዓሳ ከም መግቢ ንምውሓስ ኣብ ኩለን ዲጋታት ዞባ ካሽባርካ ዝፋረዩ ዘለዉ ዓሳታት ጥዑማይ በተንዛጊት ቆይመን ዘለዋ ማሕበራት ገፈፍቲ ዓሳ ይቐርብ ምህላው ተሓቢሩ በዚ ድማ ክሳብ ሕጂ ብዝተገብረ ፃዕሪ ኣብ ንቕሓት ህዝቢ ኣብ ኣመጋግባ ዓሳ ዓብዪ ለውጢ ተመዝጊቡ ከም ዘሎ ኣባላት ማሕበር ገፈፍቲ ዓሳ ዞባ ካሽባርካ ሓቢራ ዋሕዲ መሳርሕታት ክማል ኣሎምን ስልጠናታት በብግዜ ክወሃቦምን ድማ ተማሕፂኖም ኣለዉ ኣብ ዞባታት ካሽባርካ ደቡብን ማእከልን ኣብ ዘለዋ ዲጋታት ዝፋረዩ ዘለዉ ዓሳታት ህዝቢ ብቀረባ ክረኽቦም ይኽእል ስለ ዘሎ መግቢ ዓሳ ብሰፊሑ ተኣቶ ምህላው ብተወሳኺ ምፍላጥ ተኻይሉ ኣሎ ኣብዚ ሰሙን እዚ ኣብ ዝተፈላለየ መወሸብን መመርመርን ማእከላት ብዝተገብረ ናይ ላቦራቶሪ መርመራታት ካብቲ ካልእ ግዜ ብዝኸፍአ 231 ዜጋታት ብኮሮና ቫይረስ ምልካፎም ሚኒስትሪ ጥዕና ሓቢሩ ኣሎ إذا كان جيلن كله كورونا فيروس ترخيبهم أبغى سيرة تعقيبهم كن كجبر لهم صنحوا 255 زيجات حاويهم لما بيتم كفانهم كله 4 زيجات دما كابزوا ماكلين دوبن بمتصلين على لازم أسرت غلا قصر بكورونا فيروس تلف زيجات صارت مع العرب مشت شو ما تشحن كل التميتون سوسان كل كان بس يحمل لهم كابهم شو عتشحن تشعت تميتون ثلاثة حاويهم استفانوا 8 بمتصلين وكل التميتون 7 تشعت عندما جنا أبغى سيرة تعقيبهم كم ذكروا مثل أن بتوسخ حبيرو أرسل من زي أمانغو أقربتن أنجرنا أذكر 55 هكتار مريت بار حوي أقاتيمو إتي بار حوي نفسه أكرابي قدمي من البعوث تقمات أقربتن أنجرنا لزجبر ومربرا كتسك إلى الله كبوليس من الزباء وردن استرق بحدا يتاكم زنا سرا اتحدا قدارع كابن نابن زبوا عز قياشو كيتفو زربي وقل عش قارا مخانو جليسهم كان بعمل حدثات بغض على سعر له برغتات زبداش باركاك وصلت مثل حزب اليوم الكتمات عادت هذا صوم زي ارتكلات الجديد استجبر نقول ظاهر لعل 7 شحنا افاز واغو الى تزود غير حالة في نجارات اكدنا يزن بوليس تقاتلو نزي معالتو حلفن ارتعنا دك صدات صعبين تنورن حالة نجارات اذا نستخبا تكلات ما بجنزر تغسيعنا الله اذا خبركم تخساتل في الدم سيرترا نلو مزبال خوزيناتات بزي تفتشم الله دقيمة رأس بعد الدسم حدش عامة نكون لكم سنعيت من تهيجلس حكم يوم
أقداسي حبريتا ندليت جزاء ናይ ልዕሊ 18 ዓመት ተመክሮ ዘለዎ ኣብ ዋሽንግተን ዲሲን ቨርጂኒያን ሜሪላንድን ፍቓድ ዝውንን ብቋንቋኹም ዝረዳዳእኩም ሳመር ሪልተር ኣለኩም መገዲ ምስ ወዲ ዓዲ ከም ዝበሃል ገዛ ክትሸጡን ክትገዝኡን ምስ ደልዩውን ዕግበት ዓማዊሉ ዝኾነ መኽሰቡ ሳመር እምባየ ይኹን ምርጫኹም ትርጉም ናይ ምንባር ደሚቓ መታን ክሕሎ ሚዛና መንበሪ ባይታ ነጣጥሕ ናተይ እንብሎ ገዛና ምስ ህላወና ድስጉም كبر وحسنت عبيتنا بدرب مخسب زخحس عبي كركب كم بيتنا مفتح جزاوتنا نعتر مس سمر امباي ريلتر
توسخي حبريتا نقول لكم شيء تجزع ماويلنا بحاجة % راح مرو أقلقلوت كلبكم تزالينا خمد لنا نحبر
نزيادة حبريتا أو قصر سلكي شوعت 03 كلتا حادة شوعت حادة خلتا 00 اندقنا قصر سلكي شوعت 03 كلتا حادة شوعت حادة خلتا 00 سامر امباي إلكم توكسو
Mr. Thomas Mountain, Voice of Eritrea, DC Community Radio greatly appreciates your willingness to answer some questions Eritrea members of our community repeatedly ask. And I thank you for your time.
Good to be back.
Okay. Eritreans suffered from US-sponsored international sanctions for almost 10 years, beginning 2009. But Eritreans remained resilient and unsubdued. And thanks to the peace process between Eritrea and Ethiopia, and also thanks specifically to Ambassador Bolton, international sanctions were removed. But recently in 2021, unilateral US sanctions was applied in Eritrea, mostly based on its economy. Never mind its economy already weakened by war and decade-old international sanctions. Most people do not understand the nature and the impact of this recent sanction on ordinary Eritrean citizens. Can you share your observation and knowledge?
Well, you know, sanctions against Eritrea is nothing new. I mean, even there's official sanctions and there's unofficial sanctions. And actually, most of the damage on the Eritrean economy has been unofficial sanctions, where behind the scenes, the United States and their neo-colonial imperialist lackeys at the UN stab Eritrea in the back by undermining all sorts of things. I mean, you know, the UN Human Rights Council in 2016 was making a lot of noise because that's right when a lot of the key financing for the potash mine in Danakalia was, and of course now the war, but delayed the financing for the potash mine, which is several years delayed in getting started. So, I mean, sanctions, that's like an unofficial sanction, you know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
So, but there's so many ways that they try to destroy Eritrea, and that's the question: why? Why is the United States so against Eritrea? And this is a question I've been having to answer since way back in June 2000, when the third offensive, the Ewaani broke through the Eritrean lines, and the retreat was going back up into the highlands. And I wrote my article, "U.S. Behind Invasion of Eritrea." There's so many questions Eritreans have had since that time. Why is the U.S. against Eritrea? And I think even more so now. I mean, recently I wrote an article titled "U.S. Loses Ethiopia." Biggest strategic blunder since Iran, because the Americans have become desperate. Unity between the Eritrean and the Ethiopian people is the one really tremendous thing that's come about as a result of this war, this attempted coup by the TPLF, because now Ethiopian people will never see the Eritrean people as their enemy. And the unity between the Eritrean and the Ethiopian people is a major threat to U.S. empire. You know, the control of the Red Sea, Ba'ab al-Mandeb, entrance between the Red Sea and the Indian Ocean, through which pass some of the largest trading partners in the world, Asia and Europe. All the shipping passes through there. And like I said before, the United States, through the CIA, pays the Egyptian army salary of $1.5 billion a year to control the Suez Canal for the U.S. The U.S. pays the salaries of the Egyptian army. They control the Suez Canal as a result. But the other choke point, the strategic choke point, is the Ba'ab al-Mandeb. And this is something that historically Ethiopia has been the policeman to control this for the United States. Now, Ethiopia is, in my opinion, is completely broken with the U.S. now. You know, they're looking to China. They're looking to be independent, looking to get their fair share of the natural resources. And this is a major threat, not only to the U.S., but to the EU. But as far as the U.S. is concerned, because of economically dominant anymore, there is still militarily dominant. So the world has to be kneel down to the United States because they have the most powerful military. Now, this big defeat with TPLF in Ethiopia. I mean, the U.S. did some really stupid thing. When the U.S. general in Djibouti said, "We're ready to send our troops to Ethiopia," oh my God. Just a shockwave rolled across the Middle East. He couldn't have said it any more clearly. Everybody that had any illusions about the role the U.S. played in the region, that were destroyed right there, because they knew the U.S. would be willing to use their military to intervene in Africa and support of terrorism. So I think that wave, the Ethiopian people now see that the U.S. is not their friend, and there's very little hope of them ever regaining that sort of trust, and that Ethiopia has to stand on its own 2 feet and rely on others besides the U.S. The thing is, the U.S. is threatened by that because they depended on Ethiopia to control the Ba'ab al-Mandeb. Now they no longer can, maybe just the opposite. In my opinion, it's just a matter of time before the Djibouti authorities, under pressure from Ethiopia, are going to have to shut down the U.S. base there. Because how is Ethiopia going to allow a military threat in their backyard right there, already been used to threaten them with? So Ethiopia has the political dominance. I mean, the economic dominance there. They could come in and tell Djibouti, look, it's not going to happen quickly. It's going to happen very low key, but it'll happen, because I don't think that Ethiopia is going to tolerate this. But, you know, Americans are threatened by all this unity. So Eritrea is the threat of the good example. And now Ethiopia is becoming the threat of the good example through following Eritrea's example. And, you know, when I speak about this, I'd like to talk about how, you know, we were all there when Abiy first came to Asmara in July of 2018. I was in the streets. The whole Asmara was just in joy, you know. August, Isaias went to Addis. And when he addressed the music peace concert in the indoors arena, when Abiy addressed that concert, at the end of the concert, he gave about a 40-minute speech. And 5 minutes from the end of the speech, he summed up all these problems that Ethiopia was having, all this internally displaced, this war, all the problems they had. He said, but don't worry, Isaias is leading us. Isaias is leading Abiy. He said that, and we watched it 3 times in a row as it was replayed that night. And to make sure we got it right in Amhara, right? So Isaias is leading us. As far as I know, I'm the only one in the entire world that's ever commented on this. And the fact that, you know, whether the Ethiopian or the Eritrean people know that Abiy said that, the U.S. CIA knows it. The U.S. national security establishment clearly registered Abiy saying that because they listen to every word he has and he says and analyzes it, right? So this made it clear to the U.S. at that time, deal was in the work, that this was something they hadn't planned on when they sort of sat back and allowed, they didn't allow it, it was going to happen anyway. But when the peace deal between Eritrea and Ethiopia, when Donald Yamamoto was forced to come and kneel down in Asmara and accept Isaias's terms, then, that was like a breakthrough, and it happened in a period of chaos that was taking place when Rex Tillerson, as Secretary of State, had been fired on a plane leaving Addis Ababa, and he was replaced eventually by Mike Pompeo, a congressman from Kansas. What does he know about Africa? Who had been head of the CIA. So this whole period when the CIA and the State Department was in uproar and kind of nobody was really in charge was when this deal took place. And that's how, it would have happened anyway, but it was just the timing was right. And, when that happened, there was a wake-up call to the CIA. And they said, look, Donald Yamamoto did not stop this deal. So they blamed him. So they exiled him ambassador to Somalia. So, what I'm saying? The United States kind of had to run to catch up, and they've been running to catch up ever since. And they're always one step behind. And the result is that they backed this TPLF counter-revolutionary coup d'etat, and it backfired on them. In its history, the TPLF has never once won a single major battle. Not once. In 1990, they were in such desperate situation as the Derg regime was putting them under so much intense pressure militarily. DPLF, Eritrean People's Liberation Front, had to launch Operation Fenkel, Liberation of Massawa, 6 months early to take the pressure off them. A year before they came to power, they were in a desperate situation. And they've never won a major battle. They've been defeated every time, especially in the wars with Eritrea. So the idea that they were going to pull this coup off right from the beginning was sort of like this arrogance and the stupidity of the CIA. And the fact that the TPLF attacked the major arms depot in Ethiopia, which is in Tigray, and failed to capture it. And that was critical because all the weapons they needed were there. Without this, they weren't going to be able to march on Addis Ababa and overthrow Abiy. So they had to take that base, and they failed. So how, I'm saying it's these guys are incompetent. They're not fighters. They're just killers. And as killers, that's all they know how to do. So when they failed there, that should have tipped everybody off that this war was not going to go well in TPLF's favor. The Ethiopian army had been hollowed out. When the TPLF withdrew to Tigray, when they took all their fighters from their Ethiopian army, brought them back to Tigray, 85% of the Ethiopian army was basically gone. Their key fighting units, all their military infrastructure were all Tigrayan generals. So the Ethiopian army was just a shell of itself. And that's what the CIA and the TPLF was counting on because they were used to be the Ethiopian army. Now that army that was in Tigray would be able to march on, capture all these weapons and march on Addis and overthrow the government. Okay, so what put a stop to all that? At the time, Abiy got up and he said back a year ago in November of 2020 that after the coup attempt, within a couple of days, he flew to Asmara, right? And he came with his 3 most trusted generals. And afterwards, he said that we asked Eritrea for logistics and military support. Now, logistics and weapons is what he said. Now, what weapons do they need? Ethiopia doesn't need small arms. Ethiopia doesn't need jet airplanes. What Ethiopia needed was mechanized and armored divisions. And this is what Eritrea is famous for. Personally, I was there. It was within less than a day that Abiy left Asmara after asking for military support, that the Eritrean mechanized divisions began rolling into Tigray. I've said many times, because one of the first things you hear about is the fact that Eritrean martyrs' blood is fertilizing the fields of independence in Ethiopia. Once again, Eritreans had to go, our children had to go and destroy Wayani. And that was required because without that, it was a good chance that Abiy would fall, in my opinion.
Okay, Mr. Thomas, we can go to the next question. You can do your follow-up at the end of this question. Maybe it is a wishful thinking, but almost all Eritreans in diaspora wish and long for good Eritrean-USA relations based on mutual respect and benefits. But also many Eritreans complain that the U.S. ambassador in Asmara is working daily not to mend U.S.-Eritrean relations, but to the contrary is engaged in media campaign to further disrupt the already damaged relations. he seemed to be more dogmatic and ideological when compared to previous ambassadors before him. So is the USA best served by the presence of this ambassador? And also, why is the Eritrean government tolerating him when he repeatedly meddles in its internal affairs by participating in media campaigns against Eritrea? As you know, Eritreans have expelled many ambassadors in the past in similar circumstances.
I mean, look, when they speak about human rights, they're so hypocritical, the U.S. I mean, Eritrea's got to recognize this, that everything that comes out of the mouths of these American spokesmen it's just all sheer hypocrisy. For example, human rights, okay, food, water, shelter, medical care, and education for your children. Those are the 5 fundamental human rights. Okay, what is freedom of the press if your children are cold, hungry, sick, and illiterate? Okay, so for the African people, human rights are those 5 things, and all this Western talk about human rights is all a smokescreen for the fact that the West is responsible for the fact that Africans, there's massive human rights violations in terms of people who are cold, hungry, sick, and illiterate, while the West sucks super profits out of Africa. Now, Eritreans have to realize that without the super profits out of Africa, the Western rich standard of living of the Europeans and the Americans is going to be reduced dramatically because South America, Asia, the Americans and the Europeans can no longer extract super profits out of those economies anymore. The only place they can extract super profits is out of Africa. If they can't keep sucking this blood of Africa, they can't bribe the American and the European populations with high standard of livings, salaries, high salaries, education, all these other things. Okay, medical care. So what we're talking about is super exploitation of Africa being at the essence of American and European economies. Okay, for example, in Tanzania, Anglo-American has one of the biggest gold mines in the world, operating for a long time there, and they pay a 4% royalty to the Tanzanian government. 4%. The gold is $1,700, $1,800. They're paying like what, $60, $70 an ounce. So in Eritrea, they're getting 40% for the Bisha gold mine. Now, if Ethiopia starts getting 40% for all their new gold mines and uranium and whatever they have and copper or whatever minerals they have or their energy resources, it's going to make a big dent in the super profits coming out of Africa. And once that threat of a good example starts to spread, the other African countries start saying, hey, Eritrea is getting 40%, now Ethiopia is getting 40%, we got to get 40%, not 4%. Like in Tanzania. That's going to be a big threat. So the United States is right in there with their European allies in, violating human rights by super exploiting the economies and leaving the people cold, hungry, sick, and illiterate while they live the flat, bloated lives of parasites, which is a basic human rights violation, the right to life itself. So when the American embassy in Asmara issues statements about Eritrean people, we support the Eritrean people's struggle for human rights. And while they're putting sanctions on Eritrea, which making it harder for the government to make sure everybody is not cold, hungry, sick, and illiterate, that's the ultimate hypocrisy. And, wanting to have good relations with these kind of people, I mean, I'm kind of sad I'm back in the U.S. from Eritrea, but I hadn't any choice because of all the punishment the Western sanctions, official and unofficial, have, caused to the Eritrean people. So in Asmara, I think the Americans have understood that they're really never going to be very successful. So they don't put their sharpest pencils. The sharpest pencils in the drawers in the U.S. diplomatic circles are not sent to us. I know I've met some of the people that are stationed there and over the years, and they're not so smart. It's sort of like they know they're not going to get anywhere, so just put some dummy over there. I mean, these guys are dummies. They're making the Eritrean people really united because they're being insulting. How can the Eritrean people accept this sort of insults? This is all the hard work everybody does, all the sacrifice, the blood the country shed, and then they're going to say these things? So it's like this backfiring. It's like the whole policy in the Horn of Africa is backfired now, and the U.S. is about to lose its control over critically strategic choke point for its international dominance. And I've long predicted that the day the U.S. loses military control over the Bab al-Mandeb marks the beginning of the end of U.S. international dominance.
Okay, Mr. Thomas, let's move to the next question. The war in Ethiopia continues unabated, now mostly on Tigray border region. Eritrea is directly impacted by this war. Maybe if you can elaborate on this, and also on Prime Minister Abiy decision to halt the advance of Ethiopian troops into Mekelle? And finally, what's your observation for the end game of the war in Ethiopia?
Well, like I said earlier, Eritrean blood waters is continuing to fertilize the soil of Ethiopian freedom. And that's what's happening even now, because the Wayane TPLF terrorists have been attacking Eritrea, shelling and other things like that. Not only have they been shelling the humanitarian corridor coming up to Afar, blocking the aid from coming, that they say that, that's deliberate. I mean, they're blocking the aid and then blaming the government. But still, on one hand, much of the forces that were mobilized to defeat the TPLF terrorists in Afar and Amhara were militias. And, these militias have been ones their families have been experienced firsthand barbaric crimes that the TPLF terrorists have carried out, like they did in 2000 or tried to do in 2000 in Eritrea. They were able to do a much bigger way in Amhara and Afar, just massacring and looting and pillaging and destroying everything. So, Eritreans are still impacted because we're still a war going on there. But, Abiy smart, and he's getting advice from his eyes. Don't let these militias go inside Tigray, because if they do, they're really angry. They've seen how their grandmothers were raped. You know what I'm saying? Their children were murdered. Their priests were murdered. I mean, it's like this. And their fields were burned. Everything. They want to go on revenge, so have to hold them back. That's smart, okay? Until they really get everybody calmed down and ready to go. And secondly, the good example of this is, where are the Tigrayan people's heads at? We hear that Hermela Aragawi, the famous Tigrayan activist that's now in Ethiopia, her own brother still supports Wayane in the United States. Even her mother is scared. I mean, this terrorist that's so deeply rooted in the Tigrayan psyche, is that it? That how can your mother be, and you just still support Wayane? Like Hermela's brother. So this is something I think all Eritrean people, when you find this out, you kind of feel sick, because, I've written before, and my first interview I ever did, first and only interview on Eritrean TV, I talked about how Eritrean forefathers and foremothers had centuries to learn to come up with a name for this twisted snake of a road the Italians built connecting Karen and Asmara. They call it Libi Tigray, heart of Tigray. This twisted snake of a road, heart of Tigray. Forefathers and foremothers had wisdom, and they knew this. And Eritreans, I don't think Eritrean people can forget this, because, it's like, it's at your disadvantage if you do. But, that's the key question, is these Tigrayans, are they going to continue sending their children to get slaughtered? And the people outside, are they going to still say, it's good that all the children are dying? I mean, I don't know if people saw the interview with this Australian medical worker, been there for 34 years in Afar, and she said, the streets are full of thousands of dead Tigrayan boys and girls who were just slaughtered, and no way we can bury them even. And this is just in one town of many, many towns. So how long is this going to go on? But still, you hear discouraging news sometimes about where the Tigrayan people's heads at, because that's $6 million question. How the Tigrayan people are they going to continue to accept Wayane? Are they going to turn on Wayane and, get rid of Wayane, help get rid of Wayane? And so peace can come to not only Tigray, but all of Ethiopia. Because as long as this cancer is growing, and this TPLF terrorist cancer is growing in Tigray, even if it's just among the people still, that's a cancer, and it's always going to be a threat to Ethiopia.
Yes, if you want to say anything at the end, also, I can give you a chance.
Okay, yeah, I just, to get a more in-depth version of this, more complete version of this interview, Thomas Mountain on Menelik TV there. It's like an hour and 36 minutes. One of the longest interviews I've ever did. But, there's so much to cover when you talk about Ethiopia, Eritrea, the Horn of Africa.
Yes, I listened to it. I enjoyed it. I also enjoy all your writing, your essay. You're a great writer. Years back, Voice of Eritrea-DC interviewed you while you were in Asmara. And today we thank you again for this interview from your stay in Virginia. I'm thankful to you that you're always on the side of Eritrea, supporting Eritrea.
Well, in Eritrea, when we raise a toast, we say Hade Libi, one heart, right?
Hade Libi, yes.
Right, and I say one day, all of the Horn of Africa, we're going to say Hade Libi.
Thank you, Mr. Thomas Mountain.
Okay, good to be on. We'll talk to you.
سجلك الله حدانا تعبت يا الله تنسيرك
كبرا سمعتنا بنايلوم معلتي مرباتنا عجيبكم كتكونوا تسفا قبر حتو رئيتو ونقفتا انتلوكم اب voiceoferitrea.voiceoferitrea.com توكسنا اب زمت سمون بخال مربات كسام راخب تحنكنيو برخ سمون
What